She's a gold digger," my husband's mother, Diane, raged to anyone who would listen during the weeks leading up to our wedding, her voice carrying the particular kind of contempt that only comes from someone who decided she understood my motivations and my character based on nothing more than the fact that my fiancé, her son, Michael, came from a working-class background and I apparently didn't. She positioned herself as the protector of the family, the one person who could see through what she perceived as my calculated scheme to exploit her son for his potential or his family connections or whatever other fictional narrative she deconstructed about my intentions. Michael's father, Richard, went along with his wife's assessment without much apparent independent thought, offering comments like these types always know what they re-doing and you re-making a mistake, son, whenever he encountered Michael. Michael's 3 siblings, 2 brothers and a sister, rallied around their mother's position, none of them bothering to get to know me or to ask Michael directly about our relationship or our future together. They created a family united in their belief that I was somehow inadequate, somehow calculating, somehow not worthy of their precious family member. So when the wedding invitations went out, simple, elegant invitations to a small ceremony at a beautiful venue, not one member of my fiancé's family responded with a yes. Not one. His mother sent back a card that said, "We will not participate in watching our son throw his life away," which was perhaps the most dramatic response to a wedding invitation I could have imagined. His siblings didn't respond at all, leaving Michael to feel the awkward silence and the implied rejection. His father called Michael 2 days before the wedding and told him it wasn't too late to back out, that he could still save himself from what he was doing. So we got married in a small ceremony with just my family and a handful of close friends without any representation from Michael's side. With an absence that was conspicuous and painful and that seemed to confirm his family's narrative that this wedding was somehow illegitimate or problematic or worthy of boycott. But afterwards, when it was just the 2 of us in the limousine heading to our hotel, I took Michael's hand and I whispered something to him that would completely recalibrate his understanding of our relationship, our future, and his family's miscalculation. "Ready to move into my mansion? Hope your family likes their trailer park." The expression on Michael's face was a combination of confusion and gradual realization that I somehow neglected to mention a rather significant detail about my financial situation during our courtship and engagement. My name is Catherine Hendricks, and I'm 37 years old, which means I've lived long enough to understand that the people who judge you most harshly often do so based on the least amount of actual information. I come from a background that might be described as uncomfortably complicated. My father was a venture capitalist who built substantial wealth before his death when I was 18. And my mother comes from old money on the East Coast side of her family. What this meant in practical terms was that I grew up with financial resources, but I grew up in an environment where those resources were explicitly downplayed. Where wealth was treated as something vaguely embarrassing that you didn't discuss openly, where the expectation was that you would develop your own capabilities rather than relying on family money. My father had instilled in me a philosophy about wealth that had fundamentally shaped how I approached money. Wealth is only real if you understand how to create it. He'd said to me when I was 16 and asking about inheritance, "Anyone can inherit money. What matters is whether you can build something yourself, whether you can create value, whether you can make intelligent decisions about money independent of what I've given you." So when my father died and I inherited approximately $8 million in assets, a combination of investment portfolio, real estate holdings, and various other properties, I made a deliberate decision. I wasn't going to rely on that inheritance to define my life. I was going to build my own empire, and I was going to use the inherited wealth as seed capital for that empire, not as a replacement for building something myself. I spent my 20s working as a management consultant at a major firm, learning about business operations, financial analysis, strategic decision-making, and organizational restructuring. I learned from some of the best minds in business. I learned to identify opportunities and undervalued assets. I learned to see where value could be created through strategic intervention. By 30, I accumulated approximately $3 million in personal earnings through my consulting work and my own investment decisions. By 35, I purchased my first major real estate development project, a historic textile mill in North Carolina that had been abandoned for 15 years. I'd spent 2 years systematically renovating it, transforming it into a mixed-use development with luxury apartments, commercial retail space, and high-end office spaces for creative companies and technology firms. The project had been extraordinarily successful. The property, which I'd purchased for $1.2 million, had appreciated to approximately $24 million within 6 years. I'd leveraged that success to purchase additional properties, 3 more mill conversions in different cities, a luxury resort property in the mountains, several commercial real estate projects in emerging urban neighborhoods. By the time I met Michael, I had accumulated a net worth of approximately $87 million. I owned 8 properties worth a combined $180 million. I had an investment portfolio worth approximately $45 million. I had business interests that generated approximately $12 million in annual revenue. But I didn't look particularly wealthy in the way that people typically imagine wealth. I didn't wear designer clothes exclusively. I drove a nice but not ostentatious car, a practical Range Rover rather than a Ferrari. I lived in a beautiful but understated home. I deliberately avoided the kind of visible markers of wealth that would announce my financial status to the world. This was partly practical. I didn't want the complications that came with being obviously wealthy, the requests for loans, the people suddenly appearing in my life with various schemes and solicitations. But it was also partly philosophical, stemming from my father's belief that real wealth was demonstrated through capability and intelligence, not through consumption and display. I met Michael at a charity event where I was on the planning committee. He was working as an electrician, running his own small business, genuinely skilled at what he did, genuinely proud of his work. He was intelligent, curious, kind, and unpretentious. He had no idea how wealthy I was. I didn't tell him. We dated for 8 months before I realized I was falling in love with him. We dated for 14 months before he asked me to marry him. And I said yes without ever having told him about my financial situation. Why? Partly because I wanted to know if he loved me for who I was, not for what I had. Partly because I was testing him, to see if he would be resentful or calculating once he learned the truth. Partly because I was enjoying the privacy of a relationship where money wasn't a factor, where he saw me as an equal, where we were just 2 people building something together rather than a rich woman and a working-class man navigating complicated financial dynamics. The problem was that Michael's family didn't see it that way. Michael's family saw my lack of obvious wealth markers and my relatively simple lifestyle as evidence that I was somehow calculating, that I was positioning myself as less successful or less wealthy than Michael so that I could appear non-threatening and therefore more appealing, that I was essentially running a con. Michael's mother, Diane, had done some kind of online research, looking at my social media, trying to find information about my background, drawing conclusions from minimal data. She'd apparently decided that I was from a working-class background myself, that I deliberately positioned myself as ordinary, that I was now manipulating her son into marriage. When Michael told his family that we were engaged, his mother had responded with rage. "She doesn't have anything," Diane had said to Michael, according to what he told me. "She's probably going to expect you to support her. You're throwing your life away." Michael had tried to defend me, but his family was united in their skepticism and their judgment. They decided collectively that they would boycott the wedding, that they would refuse to participate in what they saw as their son's mistake. The boycott was devastating for Michael in ways that I think he hadn't fully anticipated. He loved his family. He wanted their blessing. He wanted them to accept me. But they refused, and their refusal created an ache that I could see in his face every time the wedding approached. So I decided not to tell him about my wealth before the wedding. I decided to let the wedding happen with his family's absence. And then I decided to show him and to show them, exactly what the situation actually was. The wedding was beautiful. Small, intimate, with about 50 people, my family, Michael's best friend and his partner, a few colleagues from my projects, close friends. Michael's family wasn't there. Their absence was conspicuous and painful, but we moved forward anyway. At the reception, after the ceremony, I stood and made a brief toast. I thanked everyone for being there. I talked about love and commitment and building a future with someone you genuinely care about. I made a comment about how it was interesting that some people judge others based on incomplete information, but that those judgments usually say more about the judges than about the people being judged. After the reception, in the limousine heading to our hotel for the night, I told Michael the truth. I explained my background. I explained my inheritance. I explained my real estate projects. I explained my investment portfolio. I explained my net worth. I explained that I owned a mansion worth approximately $8 million, that I had another dozen properties worth varying amounts. That I had accumulated approximately $87 million in personal wealth through my own work and decision-making. Michael's reaction was complex. There was shock, absolutely. But there was also hurt. Hurt that I hadn't told him, hurt that I'd allowed him to feel insecure about his financial situation relative to mine. Hurt that I'd essentially lied to him through omission by not sharing this crucial information about myself. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, and I could hear both anger and pain in his voice. I explained my reasoning. I explained that I'd wanted to know if he loved me for who I was, not for what I had. I explained that I'd been protecting my privacy and testing the authenticity of his feelings. I explained that I wanted to see if he would be resentful or calculating once he learned the truth. "So this was a test?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "And you passed." But also, I genuinely enjoyed our relationship without this complicating it. I enjoyed being with someone who saw me as an equal, who wasn't interested in what I could provide financially, who just wanted to be with me. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "We need to talk about this more when we're not exhausted and overwhelmed." So the next day, when we were settled in our hotel, we talked. Michael asked to see documentation of my wealth, not out of distrust, but out of genuine need to process and understand what had changed overnight. I showed him the property deeds. I showed him the investment account statements. I showed him the business documentation. I showed him the numbers that proved what I'd claimed. By the end of the conversation, Michael was processing not just my wealth, but what my wealth meant for his family's judgment. His family had decided I was a gold digger based on the assumption that I was poor or working class. But the reality was the opposite. I was significantly wealthier than Michael. His family's narrative had been completely wrong. When Michael told his family the truth, when he told them that his wife was worth approximately $87 million, that she owned multiple major properties, that she came from a background of privilege that they hadn't even suspected, their reaction was complicated. His mother, who'd led the charge to boycott the wedding, initially seemed embarrassed. She called Michael and apologized, saying she'd misunderstood the situation. But then, over the following weeks, her embarrassment transformed into something else: resentment that I hadn't corrected their assumption, resentment that I'd allowed them to be wrong about me, resentment that I'd positioned myself in a way that had made them look foolish. Michael's father called and asked if I could help with his mortgage payments, a request that revealed that their concern hadn't actually been about Michael's well-being but about their own financial situation. Michael's siblings, who'd rallied around their mother's position, became suddenly very interested in knowing me. They started calling, asking to see me, suggesting we have family dinners. Their motivation had shifted from protection to potential benefit. And Michael was left navigating the complicated emotions of having his family's judgment proven wrong, but having that wrong judgment transform into a different kind of opportunism rather than into genuine acceptance and apology. I handled it calmly and professionally. I made it clear to Michael's family that my wealth was not accessible to them, that I'd married Michael for who he was, not because I wanted to support his family, and that trying to leverage their relationship with Michael to access my resources would be unsuccessful. For Michael's parents and siblings, I made a specific offer: I would help each of them with one financial emergency or one significant financial goal if they asked directly and honestly. One time. One significant assistance per person. But not ongoing support, not regular financial relationships, not expectations of continued generosity. Michael's father used his assistance to pay off his mortgage. Michael's mother initially refused, then later came back and asked if I could help with her medical bills, a request that suggested she finally let go of her resentment enough to ask for help. I paid those bills. Michael's siblings asked for help with various things. One wanted help with a down payment on a house, another wanted help with business equipment. I provided the assistance. After those one-time interventions, I made it clear that the arrangement was complete. No more financial support. No more assistance. They were welcome to be part of my life and Michael's life, but on the basis of genuine relationship, not on the basis of financial transactions. Michael's family adjusted gradually. They came to accept that I wasn't going anywhere, that I genuinely loved their son, that my wealth was real and wasn't going to be channeled to them indefinitely. But something had changed fundamentally. The boycott of our wedding had revealed their character to me in ways that no amount of getting to know them gradually would have. It had revealed that they were capable of judgment without information, that they were capable of resentment without justification, that they were capable of opportunism once they believed money was available. Michael struggled with that realization. He struggled with understanding that his parents had treated him poorly, not out of genuine concern for his well-being, but out of concern about what they thought my financial status was. He struggled with understanding that their eventual acceptance of me was motivated by the possibility of financial benefit rather than by genuine acknowledgement that they'd been wrong. What happened with my comment about the trailer park needs some clarification. I said it as a kind of dark humor in that limousine, a way to express my frustration about his family's judgment. But the comment revealed something about me that I do and think I was proud of. I was capable of contempt toward his family based on their financial status and their circumstances. I was capable of mockery about where they lived and how they lived. That realization made me uncomfortable. It made me recognize that despite all my philosophical talk about wealth not defining worth, I was capable of snobbery and judgment based on financial circumstances. Michael called me out on it gently, suggesting that maybe I should treat his family with more respect than I was showing. He was right. So I adjusted. I treated his family with kindness and genuine respect, not out of obligation, but out of recognition that they deserved to be treated with dignity regardless of their financial circumstances. But the fundamental dynamic had been established. I was significantly wealthier than Michael, significantly wealthier than his family, and I had the power in the relationship in ways that were complicated and sometimes uncomfortable. Michael and I eventually bought the mansion I'd mentioned, a $8 million property with 12 bedrooms, extensive grounds, a pool, and all the accoutrements of significant wealth. His family was invited to visit, and they came, and they marveled at the property, and they seemed to understand finally the scale of what they'd misjudged when they boycotted our wedding. Michael's mother eventually acknowledged, in her way, that she'd been wrong about me. She said, "I thought you were after Michael's money, but you're actually incredibly successful yourself." Which was her way of apologizing, I think. But the damage to that relationship had already been done. We maintained cordial family relationships, but there was always an underlying tension stemming from that initial boycott and the judgment it had represented. Michael and I have now been married for 6 years. We have 2 children. We live in the mansion. Michael has scaled back his electrical work to focus on smaller projects that genuinely interest him, and I continue to manage my real estate portfolio and my various business interests. What I've learned from this entire experience is that wealth creates complications in relationships that can't be easily resolved. It creates power imbalances that are difficult to navigate. It creates opportunities for judgment, resentment, and opportunism in ways that are painful to experience. I don't regret not telling Michael about my wealth before the wedding. But I do regret not handling the revelation with more sensitivity to how it would affect him and his family relationships. I regret the comment about the trailer park, which revealed my own capacity for snobbery. I regret allowing my frustration with his family's judgment to color my behavior toward them in ways that weren't entirely fair or kind. What I don't regret is choosing Michael, understanding him as a genuine person first before wealth complicated the equation, and building a life with someone who challenges me to be better than my worst impulses toward contempt and judgment. The mansion is beautiful. The property is impressive. The wealth has enabled many wonderful experiences and opportunities. But the most valuable thing in all of this is the relationship with Michael, the way he's helped me understand that wealth is ultimately less important than kindness, that financial status is ultimately less significant than genuine human connection, and that the people who judge you most harshly often do so based on incomplete information that reveals more about their own limitations than about your actual worth. Michael's family boycotted our wedding based on an assumption that was completely wrong. They thought they were protecting their son from a gold digger. They didn't realize that their son was marrying someone whose financial situation was far superior to their own, whose background was far more privileged than they'd imagined, whose actual worth, both financial and personal, was something they couldn't have anticipated. That's the irony that sits at the heart of this story. The judgment they made was not just wrong, but wrong in a way that revealed their own insecurity and their own assumptions about what matters and what doesn't in life.